There are several different ways you can create texture in clay. One way to do that is with subtractive or pressed textures. You can really do this with anything. I rolled out some slabs to practice some of my textures. Some objects that I found around my house that I think would be interesting would be the end of my marker cap. When you're practicing your textures, think about composition, think about if things are overlapping, if you're making a pattern. I have several of these templates with different shapes that I often like to use to press in different textures. Also try varying the pressure. So if you press hard, you're going to get a clearer image. Make sure that you're not pressing so hard that you're altering the shape of your tile. I just quickly cut these out, but if you're actually making a tile, you would want it to be super clean. So if you do press too hard and the tile gets kind of warped, then go back later and square up your edges. I also like to use my Sgraffito tool to create different textures. And this clay is a little bit soft. Leather hard is a more ideal stage to carve in to get really clean lines. But you can also use the side of a card or another type of straight edge to get really clean lines. I like to use this end of my sculpture tool or Sgraffito tool because then I get this kind of V. I wouldn't want to carve a line with the blade like an X-Acto because that line will be really thin and kind of close up. This doesn't look too bad, but sometimes you can get really sharp lines. I would not recommend using a needle tool to carve lines. I consider a needle tool a cutting tool, not a drawing tool. It will leave kind of sharp edges. You can also use tools to create interesting textures. You can also use the side of a slat or a dowel rod or even a wooden ruler to paddle the edges to get your edges nice and straight. Another way to approach texture is with additive texture. I would want to score and slip these. I'm just going to kind of experiment with some different arrangements. You can also take pieces of clay and make different shapes. You can also use similar objects, add a raised surface. This is kind of like using a sprig, but it could be really interesting to explore with both sunken or pressed textures as well as the same type of motif, but that's added onto your surface. Depending on what you're making, you want to think about the thickness of any attachments. You may not want to have something that's really thick that you add onto a piece. And again, make sure you score both pieces.